In a world where cameras never blink and silence often speaks louder than words, two rising stars found themselves caught in something deeper than fame. This is not a confirmed story. This is not a scandal. This is a possibility. One no one has dared to tell. If you enjoy emotional storytelling, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more heartfelt stories. It started quietly, not with headlines, not with rumors, but with a glance, the kind people miss if they're not paying attention. When they first appeared together, everything felt natural. Effortless laughter, playful teasing, a chemistry that didn't look forced. Fans called it perfect casting. But behind the smiles, something else was forming. Not scripted, not rehearsed, something real. Long shooting days turned into longer conversations. Conversations turned into moments. And moments turned into something neither of them expected. It wasn't love. Not yet. But it wasn't nothing either. Fame has a way of complicating everything. Every smile becomes a headline. Every interaction becomes evidence. And every silence becomes suspicious. As their popularity grew, so did the pressure. Fans wanted more. Producers demanded perfection. The industry expected consistency. They weren't just individuals anymore. They became a pair. A brand. A story people believed in. But what happens when reality doesn't follow the script? Behind the scenes, things began to shift. Not dramatically. Not suddenly. Just slightly. Conversations became shorter. Eye contact lingered less. And laughter felt a little more controlled. No one noticed at first. But silence has a way of growing. There's always a moment. The one that changes everything. But no one ever sees it. Maybe it was a disagreement. Maybe it was a misunderstanding. Or maybe it was something neither of them could explain. One night, after a long day of filming, something broke. Not loudly. Not visibly. But internally, words were said. Or maybe words were never said at all. And sometimes that's worse. Because silence leaves room for interpretation. And interpretation often leads to distance. Fans started noticing. Not immediately, but gradually. The way they stood a little further apart. The way their conversations felt shorter. The way their interactions seemed careful. Not cold. Just different. Social media didn't help. Clips were analyzed. Expressions were dissected. Moments were replayed again and again. Something is off, people said. But no one knew what. And maybe no one ever will. Here's the thing about public figures. You see what they choose to show. You hear what they choose to say. But you never truly know what they feel. Maybe there was never a problem. Maybe the distance was just exhaustion. Or growth. Or change. Because people change. Even when fans don't want them to. Even when the world expects them to stay the same. What if? What fans saw as distance was simply two people trying to find themselves again? Not all connections are meant to be loud. Some exist quietly. In memories. In shared experiences. In moments that never make it to the screen. Maybe they didn't fall apart. Maybe they just evolved. From something intense and constant to something calm and unspoken. Because not every story ends with conflict. Some stories end with understanding. Fans often believe in perfect stories. Perfect friendships. Perfect partnerships. Perfect endings. But real life isn't perfect. It's messy, complicated, unpredictable. And sometimes what looks like a break is just a transition. A shift. A quiet turning point. There were no statements. No clarifications. No explanations. Just silence. And silence is powerful. Because it forces people to create their own version of the truth. Some believed they drifted apart. Some believed nothing changed. Some believed something bigger happened behind the scenes. But the reality? It remains unknown. When answers don't exist, stories are created. Fans built theories. Connected dots. Analyzed every detail. Because people want closure. They want explanations. They want to understand. But not every story offers that. Here's what most people forget. They are human. Not characters. Not scripted roles. But real people navigating real emotions. And sometimes the hardest battles are the ones no one sees. What if nothing bad happened? What if there was no fight, no falling out, no hidden drama? What if it was simply time? Time changing things, time creating distance, time reshaping what once was. Because time does that to everyone. Not every story has a clear conclusion. Some remain open, unfinished, undefined, and maybe that's what makes them real. Because real life doesn't always give us answers. So what really happened? The truth is, we may never know, but maybe that's okay. Because sometimes the most powerful stories are the ones left untold. In a world obsessed with answers, some stories choose silence. And maybe that silence is the loudest truth of all. Silence doesn't just hide the truth. Sometimes it protects it, and sometimes it buries it so deep, even the people involved pretend it never existed. But what if the story didn't end? What if it only went deeper? After the distance came something worse. Not anger, not conflict, but detachment. The kind that doesn't explode, but slowly erases everything. They still worked together, still appeared side by side, but something was missing. Not visible enough for headlines, but strong enough to feel. The energy had changed, and energy never lies. There are moments that never make it to the public. Moments without cameras, without scripts. Moments where everything is real. That night was one of them. No one knows exactly what happened, but something did. A conversation that went too far. Or maybe not far enough. A truth revealed, or a truth denied. And sometimes, one moment is all it takes to change everything. After that night, a decision was made. Not publicly, not officially, but silently. To continue, but differently. To stay, but with distance. To exist in the same space, without truly being in it. Because leaving completely would raise questions. And staying the same was no longer possible. What fans saw after that wasn't fake, but it wasn't fully real either. Smiles were still there. Interactions still happened, but they became controlled, measured, careful, like two people walking on invisible lines. They dared not cross again, because once something breaks, even slightly, you never interact the same way again. If you looked closely, really closely, you could see it, not in what they said, but in what they didn't. The pauses, the hesitation, the brief moments of silence that didn't used to exist. And the eyes that once held ease, now held awareness, as if both of them knew something no one else did. Some truths are too complicated to explain, not because they're dramatic, but because they're personal. What if the issue wasn't conflict, but feeling? What if something crossed a line that neither of them expected? And instead of confronting it, they chose distance. Because distance is easier than explaining something the world might not understand. The biggest risk wasn't losing each other. It was losing everything built around them. The fans, the brand, the expectations. Because people weren't just watching them, they were believing in them. And breaking that illusion would cost more than silence ever could. So they chose to protect it at the cost of themselves. From the outside, everything continued. Events, appearances, projects. But behind the scenes, two different lives were forming. Separate thoughts, separate emotions, separate realities, connected only by what they had to maintain. And sometimes, being forced to stay connected makes the distance even stronger. There were times it almost broke. Moments where something real almost slipped through. A look that lasted too long. A silence that said too much. A reaction that didn't match the script. But each time, it was pulled back, controlled, hidden. Because once the truth shows, you can't take it back. Everyone kept asking, what happened between them? But maybe that's the wrong question. Maybe the real question is, were they trying so hard not to let the world see? Silence isn't empty. It's full of things unsaid. Regret, confusion, understanding, even care. Because not all distance comes from negativity. Sometimes it comes from knowing something mattered more than it should have. Their story didn't end. It transformed from something visible to something hidden, from something obvious to something felt only in fragments. And maybe that's why it's harder to understand. What if the truth was never about conflict? What if it was about something deeper? Something neither of them could explain or allow. Because sometimes the strongest connections aren't the ones that stay loud. They're the ones that fade quietly while still existing beneath the surface. In the end, we don't always lose people. Sometimes we just lose the version of them we once had. And sometimes that's the part that hurts the most. Every story has an ending, but not every ending is the truth. Because sometimes the truth isn't hidden from the world. It's hidden from ourselves. By now, everyone had a theory. Some believed they drifted apart. Some believed something went wrong. Some believed it was all just imagination. But what if everyone was wrong? Because the biggest illusion wasn't what fans believed. It was what they were shown. There's always a layer beneath the story. The part no one talks about. The part that doesn't fit into narratives. What if the distance was never about losing connection? What if it was about realizing something too late? Something that changed how they saw each other forever. Not during filming, not during an event, but in a quiet, ordinary moment. It hit, not suddenly, but clearly. A realization that couldn't be ignored anymore. Something had crossed a line. Not physically, not dramatically, but emotionally. And once you see that, you can't unsee it. Here's the twist no one expected. What if there was no misunderstanding? No argument. No betrayal? What if the real problem was this? They understood each other too well. Too deeply. Too naturally. In a way that blurred boundaries. And that kind of connection isn't always easy to manage. So they made a choice. Not because they wanted to, but because they had to. To step back. To redraw lines. To protect what remained. Because some connections, if left unchecked, don't just grow. They complicate everything. Careers. Expectations. Reality itself. Here's what most people misunderstood. The distance wasn't rejection. It was control. Control over something that could easily become uncontrollable. Because when something feels real, too real, stepping back becomes the only option. Their silence wasn't emptiness. It was awareness, an unspoken agreement to keep things where they could still function, to keep the balance, to keep the image, to keep everything from falling apart. Because once certain truths are spoken, they change everything. Fans looked for drama, conflict, tension, separation. But what if the real story was restraint? What if the strongest thing they did was not acting on something, not saying something, not crossing a line, and choosing silence instead? The ending wasn't dramatic. No confrontation. No final goodbye. Just a shift. A quiet understanding that things could never go back to what they were. And maybe that was enough. Here's the part no one sees. Not everything disappears. Some things remain, just differently. In the way they still understand each other, without speaking. In the way they avoid certain moments, without explanation. In the way silence still says everything. So what really happened? Nothing. And everything. No fight. No fallout. Just a realization that changed the way they existed around each other. And sometimes, that's more powerful than any dramatic ending. Maybe the story was never about distance. Maybe it was about boundaries. About knowing when to step back from something that could become too real. Because not every connection is meant to be explored fully. Some are meant to be understood and left where they are. In the end, the truth isn't always loud. Sometimes it lives quietly between what was and what could never be. So the next time you watch them, look closely, not at what they show, but at what they hold back. Because sometimes the real story isn't in what happens. It's in what never did. If you enjoy emotional storytelling, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more heartfelt stories.